do things that will help us get to Mars. Well, if you're not careful, one thing you can do at the moon that won't help, and that is spend a lot of money doing things that are not really necessary. And there's an awful lot of that going on between NASA and the White House and the Senate. Let me introduce a couple of terms. MPCV, Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle. That's the new name for Orion, just so they can get around calling it Orion. And SLS, that's a new name for Ares 5. Supposedly Bush put in motion after the accident board has said a few things. The accident board of Columbia at the end of 2003 said we need to finish the space station and retire the orbiter. It's kind of a dangerous machine. They said if you fly it past 2010, it needs to be recertified, and that'll be very, very expensive. So the accident board clearly gave time up to the end of 2010 to come up with a substitute, obviously, among other things, to take people to the space station. But President Bush then came out with his program that was called not United Space Vision. I twisted the words around a little bit. It was called Vision for Space Exploration. And that consisted of finishing space station, retiring the orbiter again at the end of 2010, build a new spacecraft, land on the moon by 2020, and go to Mars. Not bad for the fact that we only had 3 orbiters left. Before the accident of Columbia, NASA people were talking about flying the shuttle until 2020 or 2025. But this is one of those tipping points. When Columbia was destroyed and we lost 7 astronauts, that indeed was a major tipping point and led to a transition. And transitions in national programs are very difficult because you got one thing going and you like it to continue to be safe, and now you're trying to invest in something new and you're not sure what that is. When we transitioned from Sputnik to suborbital after Yuri Gagarin showed us how to make one orbit, we weren't ready to do an orbit. All we could do is a 15-minute suborbital flight in April of May 5th, and then another one during the summer. But May 5th, 20 days later, the president said, I believe this nation should commit itself to landing a man on the moon and bringing him back safely.
We used that slide, but...
And I believe in anniversaries of that, and last May 25th was the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's speech. It was a great opportunity for this administration to straighten out the haziness of what people think the space program is right now. The accident board said further, it said separate crew and cargo, and they added the ambiguous phrase, on the launch vehicle. And I knew that opened the door for a study being done by a very capable engineer who ended up being administrator of NASA. He had done a previous study under guidance, I guess, of JPL, and that was to have a very big rocket, maybe even historically bigger than von Braun's, to take the cargo and the lander and so forth up to the moon. But before he did that, of course, he had to have the crew get up there somewhere, so he better put the crew on a solid rocket. Well, quite a few of us didn't think that was a good idea, and I have used the word in talking to the former governor of Utah, and a presidential candidate on the Republican Party, John Huntsman. I told him to his face that ATK lied to NASA when they said that Ares 1 could be done with the 4-segment solid, that rocket that gained all that reliability after the Challenger accident. They knew damn well that it was going to take a 5-segment solid, and even when they transitioned at great expense and turmoil to the 5-segment solid, it was not capable of lifting Orion. If you've ever seen pictures of Orion, you see that stubby little service module, and you say, Jesus, what happened to it? I thought Apollo had a big, long service module. Well, it had hydrogen and oxygen for the fuel cells instead of solar panels. But the big thing is, it also had fuel. It had fuel to be able to put Apollo command and service module and lunar module into lunar orbit. But in the Constellation program, that wasn't going to work because the Ares wasn't strong enough to lift a heavy enough Orion with enough fuel in it. So we had to put the fuel in the lander, and that was one of the many things that kind of caused one to wonder during the Bush administration, is this program going to really work out? Now, from January 04 to 2010, that's 7 years, the NASA administrator had to come up with a substitute for the shuttle. Where is it? Turns out it's the Russian Soyuz. So we're paying the Russian government what we should be paying to develop our spacecraft. We're enhancing the Russian space program for 4, 5, 6 years. And not only that, but the Orion and Ares guys have changed the name of Ares and have changed the name of spacecraft Orion. They call it now Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle. And they're going to launch it on something or other, but it may not be available till 2015, 2016. And that's government. And it competes then with the private sector. And the 4 approved government-funded commercial crew delivery, Boeing's CST-100, Sierra Nevada's HL-20 lands on a runway, SpaceX has a Dragon that Elon Musk likes salt water, so it's going to land in the ocean. And Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos, we don't know too much about that. It looks like a vertical launch and vertical landing. In my opinion, what should happen is the government taxpayer-funded Orion to compete with the private sector. The way we should deal with that is to tell Lockheed, okay, from now on it's your money, and you are now a private access to low Earth orbit. With all the experience you've gained by designing Orion, let's make an additional money-making private sector so that we can concentrate on what we really need.
Would you like to tell us about
we have 2 pieces of law that come out of the Senate that say NASA will develop a space launch system. Some of us call it the Senate launch system. And the other piece says that you will build a multi-purpose crew vehicle. Used to be called Orion. Von Braun wanted to build a multi-purpose crew vehicle. It was big because he would lift off with the crew at Earth orbit, go to the moon and lunar orbit, then you'd land with this thing, do stuff on the lunar surface, lift off, lunar orbit back to the Earth, and then land in the ocean. And you had a large propulsion stage to do translunar injection. Well, this thing needed a Nova rocket. And unfortunately, the Nova rocket wouldn't be ready till after 1970, so this wasn't going to solve Apollo. So he had to use 2 Saturn V's, launch one of them with the propulsion stage for translunar injection, and then when it's okay, you launch the crew on this big multi-purpose crew vehicle, and they rendezvous in Earth orbit. So it became the Earth orbit way to get to the moon. Then an engineer came along and looked at the segments of the mission and said, "Now wait a minute, there may be a better way. There's always a better way." And he said, instead of this multi-purpose crew vehicle, if you split the crew up into different components and come up with a command module, a service module, that'll be separated prior to re-entry, and then a lunar module with an ascent stage and descent stage, guess what? I think with prudent application and engineering, we can put it on 1 Saturn V. Now it's called Lunar Orbit Rendezvous, but misses the point as to what is the principle that made Apollo work at much, much less expense, and that is segmented spacecraft, not multi-purpose. Senate doesn't seem to understand that what they're trying to build is, and many design reference missions going to Mars, the crew gets in a vehicle for launch, they get into orbit, somehow it gets to Mars, stays at Mars while they're on the ground for a year and a half, and then they get up and they use it, come back with parachutes and heat shield. That's not really the way to do it, but that's how the NASA mission design reference missions have been. And they've never used Phobos as a staging base. And of course they've never used that brilliant invention of mine in 1985 called a Mars cycler. But I tell you, they're going to change. Now, what's going on at NASA Ames is very thrilling to me in its potential. It's called an International Lunar Research Park. Now, the U.S. needs to be leaders because we have more experience at the moon. We need to be leaders of something that in geosynchronous is called Intelsat. But at the moon, it won't look like how we do the South Pole, split up things into fly shapes and nations go have at it. We want a concerted leadership role where the U.S. will work on the infrastructure, let's say things like GPS system around the moon, the communication system, the refueling bases at L1, L2, and we may have an ideal habitat that we build for interplanetary work that we could donate, and then Chinese, Indian, somebody else can put it on their big rockets, and their lander, and then land it, and people can live in it. And that would be a good contribution. Now, we barter things when you deal with other nations in space, like the space station. So what we do is barter these services for time-to-time seats on the Chinese rocket spacecraft that are going to land on the moon, the Indian, the Japanese. So that's what we want, to send our robot fixers, because we're going to land a bunch of robots up there to do the science. And then we're going to be interested in the ice at Shackleton Crater, and the water you can get out of it, and make a commercial activity out of that. So we're going to want to send up people who are going to look into how do we mine and how do we process this, and then how do we get that material to, let's say, L1. It's in the sun all the time, and it'll split the water into hydrogen and oxygen. And now we have a commercial activity going on, and we have a science activity going on. When I created the term unified strategic space, I've modified it a little bit, but unified means not just exploration of Bush's vision for space exploration. It means exploration, science, development, commercial, civil, and security. I think that was 6. Now, if you unify those things, and then you make it strategic, you can have nice initials like USS. Now you throw in the word enterprises, Nobody knows what that is. At least they're going to be curious about it. Well, that's my new think tank. Unified. Those 6 elements of national policy, now strategic in regard to what other nations are doing, and in space, but it's enterprises. Notice it's not advisory. If you are an advisory group to the government, you've got to adhere to all sorts of congressional rules and regulations, and it's a mess. So what this think tank is going to do in Washington is to inform the American people why we have a certain space policy this way, why it developed, how it came over from previous administrations, and the progress that we're making. Is it what the American people are looking for? Is it what they're from? And if the people know this, let's say the American people, the voters know this, so will the congressional staffers, because they know that the American people vote for their boss. So if they want to keep their job, they better pay attention. Even though we didn't advise them, we just informed them what we think ought to be done. So this is going to be put into operation this coming year. I also have a National Geographic Society book, the draft in June or July, and it'll be out in April of 2013. I was going to have it before the election, but I figured nobody's going to change their vote based on this book. But who will change things is the budget may change, and the next administration, as they digest what I'm talking about through op-eds that come out before then, and certain chapters lend itself very well to documentaries. Now, how Ames has in mind bringing the nations together and what they want to do and what we are going to do, they're going to lay out on what we call the main base at Shackleton, because we're the leaders of this, what things are going to be landed by what people relative to each other. We're not going to land everything on top of one another. And then we got to move them together. So NASA Ames will build scale models, full-scale models, and it will demonstrate to people, school kids and everything, how these full-scale kind of come together and fit, and they hook together and they work. Then we set a simulated lunar landing on the big island of Hawaii, and through satellite control, we actually pre-position where these things are going to land. We put them there where we hope they're going to land, and then through satellite control, simulating control on a move, we bring them together. Now, this is a great educational device also. And then, of course, we do the real thing, and we land this various objects at the South Pole, and we put them together gradually over time. Now, this is exactly what I want to see done at Mars, but by JSC. So JSC needs to pay attention to what Ames is doing, because now we will get the nations together that think they want to go to Mars, and of course we're at the top of the list. And what we're going to do is look at the surface, pick out the main base, or maybe a couple of main bases, and figure out how they're going to land relative to each other. But then we're going to send people by an Aldrin cycler to Phobos. Of course, they'll have a guaranteed return after a year and a half there as astro controllers trained by Mission Control in Houston. And what they're going to do during the year and a half, here's 1 year and a half right here. This one's unmanned while we check it out. This is time going along here, 2036. Mars, Phobos, the Moon. I've changed my mind a good bit, obviously. Instead of having the shuttle continue to fly until 2015, one a year, it's best that we try and accelerate the commercial launches without government competition on Orion. But it looks like that when we did even add 2 more flights after the end of 2010 with the Obama administration, Obama, I didn't vote for him, but he ran on change and internationalism, and we sure as hell needed change. And the change he attempted to do, which was cancel Orion. Well, Congress won't let him cancel it because it's jobs and it's votes. And SLS, Senate Launch System, is supposed to be heritage. That's old stuff, not new stuff. And multi-purpose crew vehicle is supposed to be new stuff, but it's going to be Orion all done over again unless we change things. And if we build those two, we're going to have to cancel the James Webb Telescope. I think it's the other way around. I think we should cancel those two things. Let Lockheed transfer their Orion over to a commercial venture. Now, what we need to go from Earth orbit to anywhere out in space is a long-duration life support system of very high reliability. I don't know what that is, but we need a test bed of that growing, and that's this first arrow down here. There's a test bed, maybe 2014, 15. Then we follow that with a prototype, almost full-scale test bed. It's a cylinder, and it's an exploration habitat, long-duration life support stuff. And we're going to attach it permanently and watch improvements and check out things at the space station. Now, it also becomes a safe haven. So now if you have something at the space station, we may be able to get rid of all those lifeboats that have to change every 6 months or so. If something goes wrong in the space station and people get into this this exploration hab module and they separate from the space station, then people go up and bring them back down again. But the whole concept of assembling facilities on the surface at Mars remotely, less than a second time delay from Phobos, where we have our astro controllers, that is how we should build the base at Mars pretty much permanent. That's why I have 3 manned missions doing that a year and a half each. And these guys, when they come back, can you think of anybody more qualified to be on the first Mars final landing on the surface? So these guys come back, another group, they come back. Now these guys have a lander with them, and when 6 people come, including these 3 from the Earth, these 3 up here in Phobos are probably going to land a couple days ahead of time. We know more about what's going on than anything else. They put it together and they checked it out. Not so far away. So my scheme for how we really get to Mars leads activities at the moon for our U.S. robots and commercial activities. And we barter infrastructure services for the rides that our people take on somebody else's. But we also, I started saying now, a long-distance life support system, ideally, let's just hypothetically say that it's a big sphere and it's large. And it's got whatever it is, it's going to go wherever we want and come back again. Now, let's compare that for a moment. Instead of 1 large with 2 small, not with 2 medium. If you think about it for a while and single-point failures and how this large sphere could have 1 failure and you lose the whole mission, I think you'll agree that 2 mediums are better than 1 large. Now, if we do a little engineering exercise on these 2 mediums, one gets larger, the other gets smaller, pretty soon the small one disappears, right back where we started from. Okay, now somewhere in that trade space of small and medium-large is ideal design. Because what we can end up with at the atmosphere of Mars or the atmosphere of Earth is a smaller, lighter weight container for all the people, less fuel, so it is now a space taxi. And the other one becomes a space hab. Now this space hab, of course, we're going to land on Phobos,
couple times. Landed unmanned so we can check it out. That's the first one, the dotted line one up there.
But we got just a few minutes now.
Yeah, I got a few minutes. You don't want a lot of questions.
Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is this activity out of NASA Ames with an industrial lunar research park is really the way, the proving ground for what we want to do for real at Mars. And every person that goes to Mars stays. Okay? Now, we don't call it one-way missions anymore. They're settlers. And to emphasize that, just look a little at our history. The Pilgrims on the Mayflower didn't hang around Plymouth Rock waiting for the return trip. They came here as settlers. A lot of them lost their lives. That's the way we really... Why do that? Well, it costs a hell of a lot more to get fuel at Mars to bring people back. And what you really need is to establish a critical mass of people to live off the land. You can send people to the moon, and they're pretty easy to bring back. You can rotate people the number you need. You can also do an awful lot of things at the moon robotically. I'm not saying that there won't be a very large number of people eventually at the moon, but it certainly delays the what I think is the crucial thing that I'm aiming at, and you might guess, since we did nothing in the 50th anniversary of Kennedy's speech. How about the 55th? 2016, May 25th. I don't think a re-elected Obama is going to be too interested in that.
Well, maybe it will be different.
Hopefully we'll have a new president in it. He's got 3 years to prepare for. I believe that this nation, before 2 decades are out, should commit itself to landing Americans, permanent Earth humans, on the planet Mars for permanent occupancy. That's it. When you think about that, what history, thousands of years in the future, that's a big deal. And whoever says that is going to go down in history. And the people that are the first people there, regardless of what scheme they get there, they're going to be down in history, statues, and everything else. They'll be texting messages back and forth to the Earth. Now, to build up to that, what we need to do is, I've inserted in here, it looks a little messy right here. These are cycling missions. The first orbital becomes refueling. The next two, the HAB will end up at L1 and the other at L2, but they'll cycle back and forth, demonstrating to the private sector an ideal next step from orbital tourism, orbital space adventure. We now have circumlunar. Now we're testing if we call this an XV, exploration vehicle. Now, the vehicle consists of 2 modules, an exploration or space taxi and an exploration or space habitat. Now that habitat, as I kind of alluded to, is an ideal thing to land on the moon. But we're not going to land it there because that takes a big rocket that's expensive, and it takes a big lander. Let's let somebody else do it. We barter things in space. I'll give you this if you give me that. I frankly am pretty optimistic at reaching gradually in the next several months various candidates for the Republican nomination, so that we have kind of a unified approach to what we ought to do in the future, and a platform that will point out things like campaign promise of President Obama was to have a National Space Council. Where is it? If we had a National Space Council, do you think the Senate would have had the nerve to propose a space launch vehicle when we've got EELVs and we've never been able to get NASA and the Air Force and other needs together and decide on one rocket. Everybody wants to have their own. Okay, I covered multi-purpose crew vehicle that Von Braun wanted, and John Hubel came up with a better way of doing it. And my task as a spacecraft and orbital mechanics person is to convince the Senate and the nation that we do not need full-blown Orion government funded to get people to and from the space station. I have the faith of particularly HL-20 of Sierra Nevada, because that's the one that Richard Branson is backing. It's landing on a runway, and we can play some interesting things on that. Just think the young kids that are not so young, that are alive today, the only thing they've seen is people coming back and landing on a runway in the space shuttle. So I'm pretty enthusiastic that unless people really want to go on a spending spree, we'd be better off, I believe, putting the money into a James Webb telescope and not building a big archaic booster. We need to look at the Air Force and some of the things they're doing with EELVs and flyback boosters. Several years ago, my group of engineers were flying back boosters, and there's a new concept that I'm working on, a patent, where the core stage that goes into orbit can also be used on orbit and bring the engines and the avionics back, but use the I-beams that make up the cylindrical thing, separate into I-beams. Is now mass on orbit that will help the structure of space-based solar power.
Great.
I could probably think of a few other things. Education and a lottery for suborbital flight.
You know, I find this visionary, and to be able to continually be pumping ideas like this, and Buzz does this all the time, and I hope you find it inspiring. We have blown our schedule, but vision is something else, and there's something. I'm sorry.
You might want to print out these and then just mull over what the stuff in between. There's a comet flyby, 2 comet flybys, and 2 visits of near Earth objects. One of them is Apophis, all leading up to landing unmanned facility on Phobos and then occupying it.
Well, but we're going to do better than that. In the spring, we are deciding to do a studio specifically about the moon. And I hope you won't mind if we're going to be robbing some of these lights and using them in our studio. Having said that, thank you so much for enlightening us on the possibilities. And we all agree that there must be better ways to stop people from spending money as opposed to building things.
Well, some of the people at Ames, as part of this workshop, really do want to put NASA astronauts back on the surface of the moon 50 years after we did it in the first place. But to me, the other nations of the world would just love for us to spend that much. The space station, let me tell you, was supposed to be ready in 8 years for 8 people for $8 billion. Didn't quite make it. The space shuttle was supposed to fly 40 times a year, maybe 50 times a year. Didn't quite make it. One thing I missed. Right after Apollo, the people at NASA really wanted a 2-stage series burn, because that's the way that Von Braun liked things, whereas Korolev always liked the parallel burn. But it was a 2-stage, fully reusable, land on a runway with wings and wheels, a booster, land the orbiter later. Didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because Marshall wanted a crew of 2 in the booster.
That's right.
Can you imagine anything as absurd as that? But if somebody is selling a product to a NASA center and you know what the client wants, that's what you're going to give them. That's why 6 people said in the studies, manned versus unmanned booster, 6 teams proposed 2-stage fully reusable, just what we know. But they all had a cockpit and a crew of 2. Absolutely doomed it. And now we're trying to get, how many years later? Many years later, we're trying to get 2-stage fully reusable transport.
Thank you so much, Buzz.